The great grey Wolfhound of Thornbury Hall had bitten 3 grooms, a footman, and the vicar's own hand in the space of 2 years, and had made himself so feared through all the county that men crossed the road rather than pass the Duke's gates, which was precisely why the young woman in the plain grey gown, hunted and desperate and out of every other refuge in the world, chose Thornbury above all the fine houses she might have tried, and asked for the lowest place in it, and told no one who she really was. She gave her name at the servants' door as Cissy Marsh, a housemaid seeking a situation, and it was a lie in every particular but the first syllable. Her true name? The name written in the register of a great parish church, 3 counties distant, the name that would have brought a magistrate and a furious guardian and a cruel betrothed husband down upon Thornbury within the day, had she once let it slip, was Lady Cecilia Marchmont, the orphaned daughter of an earl, and 11 days before this grey afternoon she had done the most reckless and desperate thing of her sheltered life. She had run away. She had run from a marriage. Her guardian, an uncle who had spent the last of her inheritance and now meant to recoup himself, had promised her, sold her, in all but the name of it, to a man called Sir Rowland Ferris, a rich, cold, brutal person of 50 with a dead first wife. The servants would not speak of, and a temper the whole county gave a wide berth. Cecilia had begged and wept, and been told that the settlements were signed and her wishes were nothing, and the wedding would go forward at Michaelmas whether she consented or no. And 3 nights before that wedding, understanding at last that no one in all the world would lift a finger to save her, she had climbed from her own window with a bundle of plain clothes she had secretly bought and what few coins she could gather, and had walked out into the dark to save herself, because there was no one else to do it. She had been running ever since, hiding in carriers' carts and hedgerows, hearing at every inn the news that Sir Rowland had men out searching the roads, and a reward posted for her return. A rich man hunting his runaway property with the cold patience of a man who does not lose. And she had come at last, footsore and half-starved, and nearly out of hope, to the one corner of England she thought her hunters least likely to look, the household of a reclusive duke, so shut away from the world, and guarded by a beast so savage that scarcely anyone went near it at all. The housekeeper who took her on, a hard, harried woman named Mrs. Sowerby, glad of any girl willing to work at Thornbury, for few would stay, looked her over with weary suspicion and asked few questions, which suited Cecilia very well. "You'll have heard of the dog, I don't doubt, Mrs." Sowerby said, leading her through the cold back passages. "Everyone has. Bran, his name is an Irish wolfhound near as tall as a pony and twice as ill-tempered, and the apple of his Grace's eye. God knows why, for the brute's put 3 men to the surgeon. You'll keep well clear of him, girl, if you've any sense, and you'll not go into the West Court nor the library where he roams, and you'll not so much as look at him, and if you hear him coming, you'll stand still as a post, and let him pass. He trusts no one living but the Duke himself. He'd as soon take your arm off as sniff it. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mrs. Sowerby," said Cecilia meekly in the flat plain voice she had been practicing for a fortnight, and thought that a savage dog no one dared approach was in truth no very great terror to a woman who had just walked out alone into the night to escape a man who frightened her 1,000 times more. She had faced Sir Rowland Ferris's cold, pale eyes across a dinner table and felt her soul go small. She did not think she could be much frightened now by a dog. She thought of Sir Rowland a good deal that first night, though she tried not to, for it is the way of fear that the thing one flees follows one into the dark. She thought of the one dinner her uncle had made her sit through in the man's company, before the settlements were signed, as a sort of viewing, of how Sir Rowland had watched her all evening with his flat, pale eyes, the way a buyer watches a horse he has already paid for, cataloguing her points, and had spoken to her exactly 3 times, each time to correct or to command, of how the servants in his house had moved like people under water, slow and careful and never meeting a stranger's eye, and how one young maid, clearing the plates, had had a fading bruise along her jaw that no one remarked upon. She thought of the first wife, dead these 6 years, of whom no one would say anything at all, and of how that silence had told her more than any story could. And she thought of her uncle's face when she had begged him not to make her go, the flicker of something almost like shame, quickly smothered under the comfortable certainty that a guardian's word was law, and a girl's terror was mere maidenly nerves that marriage would cure. That was the night she had understood that no one would save her, that the whole machinery of the respectable world, guardians, settlements, the law itself, was arranged to deliver her to Sir Rowland Ferris, and would grind on to do it whatever she felt or feared or begged, and that if she wished to be saved, she would have to save herself, with her own 2 hands, out of her own window, into the dark. She had done it. It had been the most frightening thing she had ever done, and the bravest, and she did not regret it for an instant, whatever it cost her now. Better the cold and the hunger and the hiding, better a savage dog and a haunted house, than that pale, flat gaze across a table for the rest of her life. Anything was better than that. And so, she closed her eyes, there in the cold attic of the loneliest house in England, and let herself, for the first time in 11 nights, believe that she had truly gotten away, not knowing that the getting away had only been the beginning, and that the real story of her life was about to find her at last, in the shape of a great gray dog. She was given the coldest, meanest attic room in the house, and the hardest and lowest of the work, and she took it all gratefully, for it was safe and it was hidden, and no one at Thornbury knew or cared who Cissy Marsh had been before she came. She lay that first night on the thin, hard cot under the eaves, and listened to the strange house settle around her, and for the first time in 11 nights, let herself breathe. She did not yet know that she had come to the one house in England where she would be seen truly at last, nor that the seeing would begin not with any human eye, but with the savage, sorrowful, unerring instinct of a great grey dog whom everyone feared and no one had ever thought to pity. She met the terrible dog of Thornbury on her 3rd morning, and it did not go at all as the whole county would have predicted. She had been sent, in error or in spite, she was never sure which, into a part of the house she had been warned to avoid, a long stone gallery off the west court to carry away the ashes, at an hour when she had been told the beast would be out with his master. But the Duke had not ridden out that morning, and the great dog had not gone with him, and Cecilia came round the turn of the gallery with her ash-bucket and stopped dead, for there, filling the width of the passage, stood Bran. He was enormous, rough grey coat, a head like a wolf's, shoulders that came near to her waist, and a pair of deep, dark eyes fixed upon her with an intensity that stopped the breath in her throat. Every warning she had been given screamed at her to run, or to freeze, or to cry out. But Cecilia had spent her girlhood, before the money ran out and the world went hard, among horses and hounds. She knew animals as only a lonely child raised in the country knows them, and she saw, in the half-second before fear could master her, past the great size and the bared strength of him to the thing underneath. And what she saw there was not savagery at all. It was grief. The huge dog stood rigid and wary, hackles half raised, braced for the blow or the flight, or the fear that every human he met had shown him, and his dark eyes held the same thing Cecilia had seen, once, in her own glass, in the worst of her captivity, the deep, patient loneliness of a creature who has given up expecting any gentleness from the world. So she did not run, and she did not freeze. She set the bucket down, slowly, and she sank down herself, down onto the cold stones, making herself small and low, not looming, not threatening. And she did not reach for him, but only knelt there quietly with her eyes lowered and her open hand resting on her own knee. And she spoke to him, low and soft and easy, the old wordless nonsense one murmurs to a frightened animal, that is not about the words at all, but about the voice beneath them. "There now," she said. "There now, great fellow. No one's going to hurt you. No one here but me, and I'm nobody at all. There now." For a long moment the great dog did not move, and then, slowly, stiff with disbelief, as though he had forgotten how, Bran of Thornbury, who had bitten 3 grooms and a footman and the vicar, who trusted no living soul but his master, lowered his huge rough head and took one step and then another across the stones toward the kneeling maid, and he pushed his great grey muzzle into her open hand, and then, with a sound that was almost a groan, he folded his enormous body down beside her and laid his head in her lap, and let out a long shuddering breath, and was still. Cecilia sat frozen with wonder, the savage terror of the county lying heavy and warm and trusting across her knees, and she felt her eyes sting, for she knew exactly what it was to be feared and shunned and alone, and to have one soul, at last, simply be kind. And she bent her head over the great dog, and stroked his rough ears and wept a little, quietly, for them both. And that was how the undergroom found them. An hour later, the new maid and the unapproachable beast curled together on the gallery floor like old friends, and dropped his pail and ran white-faced to tell the whole servants' hall that Cissy Marsh had gone and tamed the Duke's savage wolfhound, and that it was the strangest thing ever seen at Thornbury Hall. She sat on a while after the groom had fled, alone with the great dog in the cold gallery, and something eased in her that had been clenched tight since the night she climbed from her window. For 11 days she had been prey, hunted, hiding, flinching at every strange step and every stranger's glance, trusting no one, wanted by everyone only for what she was worth to Sir Rowland Ferris. And here was this vast, wounded creature that the whole world feared, asking nothing of her, wanting nothing of her, only laying his heavy head in her lap and breathing out his long loneliness against her knee, because she had troubled to be gentle with him. It was the first wholly kind thing that had happened to her in a fortnight, and it undid her more than any cruelty could have. She understood the dog completely, and the understanding went both ways, and was a comfort beyond anything she could have named. For a runaway learns very fast that the loneliest thing in the world is not being alone, but being surrounded by people who see you as a thing to be used, and never once as yourself. Bran did not want to use her. Bran only wanted not to be afraid, and in that they were the same, the Earl's daughter and the savage hound, and each had found in the other, in a cold gallery on a grey morning, the one thing neither had dared to hope for anywhere at Thornbury, a soul that asked for nothing and simply stayed. The story went through Thornbury like fire through dry gorse, and it did not make Cecilia's hidden life easier, but harder, for a house that has agreed upon a thing is deeply unsettled to see it overturned, and the servants of Thornbury had built a good deal of their small importance on the terror of the Duke's dog, and did not love the nobody who had undone it in an afternoon. For it was not a single afternoon's wonder. From that morning, Bran the Wolfhound simply attached himself to Cissy Marsh, and would not be parted from her. He waited outside the scullery for her in the mornings. He padded at her heels through her work with his great head at her shoulder. He lay across the threshold of her cold attic at night like a grey rug of muscle, so that no one could have come at her in the dark without going through him first, which Cecilia, hunted as she was, found a comfort past telling. The beast that had trusted no one had chosen her, wholly and without reserve, and would suffer no one to speak sharp to her, nor stand too near her. And this had two effects at Thornbury, and Cecilia felt them both. The first was safety, and a strange new dignity. The other servants, who might otherwise have made a poor new maid's life a misery, grew wary of the girl the savage dog guarded, and gave her a wide and grudging berth, and their small cruelties died for fear of Bran's teeth. But the second effect was more dangerous, and it came chiefly from one quarter. From Mrs. Sowerby's own niece, the head housemaid, a sharp, handsome girl named Bet, who had ruled the female servants of Thornbury by fear and favour for 3 years, and who found her little kingdom threatened by a quiet newcomer that the master's own dog had singled out. Bet had, moreover, ambitions of her own toward the reclusive duke, for a lonely master and a bold, pretty servant are an old story, and she saw in the maid the Wolfhound loved a rival for a notice she had long coveted, and she hated her for it with the quick, hot hatred of a small nature that will not be crossed. So Bet watched Cissy Marsh and worked against her in 100 small ways, and above all she watched the growing strangeness of the new maid. For Cecilia, safe now behind her grey guardian, had begun, without quite meaning to let slip the marks of what she truly was. Bet saw that the new girl held herself, when she forgot to stoop, with the straight neck of a lady, that she spoke, when she was tired and off her guard, in a voice too soft and too educated for any scullery, that she could read. Bet had caught her once, with a book from the library open on her knee, and reading it too, not merely looking at the pictures. Bet stored it all up, every wrong note, with the patience of the envious, and she began to whisper that there was something not right about Cissy Marsh, something hidden, that a girl who talked like that, and read like that, and tamed savage dogs, was no honest housemaid but a fraud, a runaway, a thief perhaps, or worse, and that it would be a service to the house to find her out. Cecilia felt the whispers gathering around her like a cold draught under a door, and knew that her disguise, which had held for 11 desperate days, was beginning to fray, and that if it tore through and her true name came out, it would run through the county to Sir Rowland Ferris as surely as water runs downhill. She tried in those weeks to be more careful, to stoop, to keep the flat plainness in her voice, to leave the library books alone however they called to her, to make herself small and dull and forgettable. But it is a strangely difficult thing, she found, to unlearn oneself. 20 years of being a lady do not scrub off with the grates, and the harder she tried to hide the marks of her breeding, the more they seemed to show, the way a stain shows worse for the rubbing. And there was Bet, always Bet, watching with her sharp, envious eyes, missing nothing, adding it all up. Cecilia came to dread the head housemaid more than she dreaded the work, dreaded the little cold smile that meant Bet had noticed some fresh slip, the whispered conferences that fell silent when Cecilia entered the servants' hall, the sense of a net being woven patiently, strand by strand, around her. She understood the girl's hatred well enough. She had seen its like among the great ladies of her own world, the same small, vicious jealousy dressed in finer clothes. But understanding it did not blunt it. And she knew that Bet's spite and her own fraying disguise were racing now toward the same cliff, that it was only a question of time before some slip or some whisper reached the wrong ear, and the name Cecilia Marchmont was spoken aloud in a place where it could be carried, and the long, patient hunt of Sir Rowland Ferris closed its jaws at last. She had bought herself a little safety at Thornbury. She had not bought herself forever, and every kind glance from the Duke, every hour of the great dog's devotion, every day that the cold house grew a little warmer around her, made the thought of losing it, of being dragged back, a thing she could less and less bear to face. The Duke of Thornbury had not, in the ordinary way, the smallest interest in the doings of his housemaids. But the doings of his dog were another matter entirely, for the dog was very nearly the only creature in the world he loved. Alexander Croft, Duke of Thornbury, was 32 and had been alone a long time. He had lost, within a single hard year some 5 years past, both his young wife, who had died in her first childbed, and the child with her, and soon after, his last near relation, and the double grief had driven him out of the bright social world he had once moved in and into the deep solitude of Thornbury, where he had shut himself away with his lands and his books and his sorrow, and let the county make of him what it would. The county had made of him a cold and forbidding recluse, which suited him well enough, for it kept people away, and he had not, in 5 years, met a single person who made him wish to be less alone. His one companion in all that time had been the Wolfhound Bran, a pup he had taken in the very worst of his grief, a savage, difficult creature no one else could manage, whom the Duke understood precisely because the dog was, in his way, exactly as wounded and wary and shut away as the Duke himself. A man and a dog, each trusting no one, each guarding a wound. They had suited one another. And so, when the incredible news reached the Duke, that Bran, his Bran, who bore no hand but his own, had laid his head in the lap of a new housemaid and followed her about like a lamb, the Duke of Thornbury did a thing he had not done in longer than he could remember. He grew curious. He watched her at first, only to understand the dog. From a window, from the far end of a gallery, over the top of a book, the solitary Duke observed the quiet grey figure of the maid, Cissy Marsh, going about her work with his great wolfhound, shadowing her, and he tried to make out what the animal had seen in her that no one else had. And slowly, watching, he began to see it too. He saw that she was gentle with the beast, and gentle with the other creatures of the house, the stable cats, the old blind pony, a fledgling fallen from the eaves that she climbed to return to its nest. He saw that she was patient under the head housemaid's spite, and did not repay it. And he saw, as Bet had seen but read very differently, the wrongness in her. The straight neck, the educated voice, the reading. Only where Bet saw a fraud to be exposed, the Duke, who had grown up among great ladies and knew the article well, saw something that puzzled and intrigued him far more. He saw breeding. He saw a gentlewoman scrubbing his floors, and he began to wonder, with the first real curiosity he had felt about another human being in 5 years, who the maid his savage dog had chosen truly was, and what had brought a woman plainly born to a drawing-room to hide herself in a housemaid's grey gown in the coldest corner of the loneliest house in England. It disturbed him, this curiosity, more than he would have admitted. For 5 years the Duke of Thornbury had cultivated his solitude as carefully as another man cultivates a garden, and had found in it a kind of grim safety. If one loves no one and is curious about no one, then one cannot lose anyone. and the Duke had lost enough to last a lifetime. He had built his walls high and thick, and the county's dread of him had helped to keep them so, and he had told himself he was content behind them. And now, in the space of a fortnight, a quiet grey figure in a scullery gown had done to those walls exactly what she had done to the dogs, had slipped past them without seeming to try, simply by being what she was. He found himself listening for news of her. He found himself walking, without quite admitting why, in the parts of the house where she worked. He found himself one evening, standing at his library window, watching her cross the darkening court with the Wolfhound at her side, and realizing with a small cold shock that he had been standing there a full half-hour, and that it was the most peaceful half-hour he had passed in 5 years. The wound in him that had never healed did not hurt quite so much when he was watching her, and that frightened the Duke of Thornbury more than Sir Rowland Ferris would ever frighten Cecilia, for he knew none better what it was to let another soul pass the walls, and what it cost when they were taken away. And he told himself, sternly, night after night, that he would let this quiet mystery of a maid stay hidden and safe and unquestioned, and would not let himself begin to need her. He was already, though he would not yet own it, far too late. It was the dog, in the end, that made them speak, for Bran was the one creature they both loved, and a shared love will draw even two such wary and wounded people across a great distance, a step at a time. The Duke found her one evening in the West Court at dusk, with the Wolfhound leaning his great weight contentedly against her side, and he stopped, and for once did not turn away. "You are the maid who tamed my dog," he said. It was not quite a question. His voice was rough with disuse, for he spoke to almost no one. Cecilia dropped the curtsy of a servant, and kept her eyes down, and murmured that she had not tamed him, Your Grace, only been kind to him, and that Bran was not savage at all underneath, only lonely, and afraid of being hurt, and had wanted nothing all along, but for one person not to fear him. And the Duke of Thornbury went very still at that, because it was as exact a description of his own hidden heart as anyone had ever spoken, and it had been spoken, all unknowing, by a housemaid about a dog. "He was used cruelly, as a pup, before I had him," the Duke said at last, slowly, beaten and baited, and taught by every hand he met to expect a blow. It is why he bites. He struck first, all his life, because he had learned that the world would strike him. I have never been able to teach him otherwise, and yet you did it in an afternoon." "I did not teach him anything, Your Grace," said Cecilia softly, and she forgot in the dusk and the quiet to keep the plainness in her voice, so that it came out low and clear and educated, the voice of the lady she truly was. "I only did not flinch. He has spent his whole life watching people flinch from him and reading it, quite rightly, as fear or hate, and bracing to be hurt. All he needed was one soul who looked at him and was not afraid, who saw the wound and not the teeth. It is not so very hard when you have known what it is to be looked at that way yourself." And she stopped, hearing too late how much she had said and how she had said it, and she felt the Duke's gaze come to rest on her fully for the first time, keen and startled and searching, and she knew he had heard the lady in her voice and the confession in her words together. He did not challenge her. That was the mercy of him, and the beginning of everything. He only looked at her a long moment in the failing light, with the dog that trusted neither of them easily lying content between them, and said, quietly, "No, no, it is not so very hard. And yet in 35 years I have met almost no one who could do it." A pause. The dusk deepened. Somewhere a curlew called over the moor. You are no more a housemaid, I think, than Bran is a lapdog. I do not know what you are or what has driven a gentlewoman to hide in my scullery, and I will not ask you, for a person who has fled to the far end of the earth and taken a false name has reasons, and they are her own. But I will say this, you are safe here, whoever you are running from. This is a house that guards its wounded. Ask the dog. And he inclined his head to her, a duke to a maid, and walked away into the dusk, and left Cecilia standing with her hand on the great grey head, and her heart beating hard, understanding that she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time since she fled, and that being seen, which she had risked everything to avoid, was the thing she had been starving for all along. She lay awake a long time that night, with Bran's great warm bulk stretched across her threshold, and turned the strangeness of it over and over. She had run from her whole world precisely so that no one would know her, would look at her, would lay any claim upon her. Invisibility had been her only safety, and she had guarded it like her life. For the moment anyone learned that Cissy Marsh was Lady Cecilia Marchmont, the news would run straight to Sir Rowland. And yet here was this quiet, formidable, wounded man who had looked clean through her disguise in an evening. And instead of the terror she should have felt, she felt, God help her, relief. It was such a weariness, being no one. It was such a loneliness, being seen by no living eye but a dog's, and the Duke had not seized upon her secret, nor threatened it, nor demanded her story as the price of his silence. He had simply told her she was safe, and that his house guarded its wounded, and had walked away and left the whole of her secret still her own. No one had done such a thing for her in her life. Her guardian had seen a purse to be emptied. Sir Rowland had seen a possession to be collected. Even her own dead parents, kind as they were, had seen a daughter to be advantageously matched. Not one of them had ever simply looked at her and seen a frightened person and said, "You are safe here, and I ask nothing." Only the dog had done that, and now the dog's master, and Cecilia understood, lying in the dark, that the very thing she had fled across 3 counties to escape, being known, was, when it was done gently, by the right soul, not a trap at all, but the one thing she had been starving for her whole hidden life, and that she was in the gravest danger she had yet faced, not from Sir Rowland, but from her own treacherous, hoping heart. She had 3 weeks of something like peace, 3 weeks of the dog at her heels, and the Duke's quiet, deepening, unspoken regard, 3 weeks in which the loneliest house in England grew, against all its history, almost warm. And then, on a grey afternoon, a travelling carriage she knew far too well came up the long drive of Thornbury Hall, and Cecilia, glancing from an upper window, felt the blood drain out of her body, for the crest on its door was the crest of Sir Rowland Ferris, and her hunter had found her at last. She never knew for certain how he traced her, whether it was Bet's whispers, carried down the county by some carrier or peddler, until they reached the ears of the men Sir Rowland had searching, or only the cold patience of a rich man who checks every house in turn. It did not matter. He was here. Cecilia stood frozen at the window and watched the cold, pale figure of the man she had fled climb down at the great door, all false courtesy, and be admitted. And she heard within the hour the summons she had dreaded, that a gentleman had come inquiring after a runaway young woman of quality, a Lady Cecilia Marchmont, believed to be hiding among the servants of the neighbourhood under a false name, and that all the female staff were to be assembled in the great hall for the gentleman to look over, for he had known the lady and would know her again. There was no escape from it. The doors were watched. To run now would be to confess. And so Lady Cecilia Marchmont, in her housemaid's grey gown, was herded with the other women into the great hall of Thornbury to be inspected by the man who had bought her. And she walked in with her heart in her throat, and the great Wolfhound pressed hard and bristling against her side. For Bran had taken one look at Sir Rowland Ferrys and gone rigid, a low, continuous growl rolling in his chest, the hackles standing all down his spine. The beast that read wounded souls had read this one too, and knew it for a predator, and placed his own great body between the pale, cold man and the maid he loved. Sir Rowland's eyes went down the line of frightened women slowly, savouring it, and Cecilia saw the moment they reached her, and the thin, cruel smile that spread across his face, and she knew that the disguise was over, that 11 days and 3 weeks of desperate hiding had come to nothing, and that unless some miracle intervened, she would be dragged back that very hour to the man and the marriage she had risked her life to flee. "There she is," said Sir Rowland Ferrys, softly, pointing, and every head in the hall turned toward the grey-gowned maid with the snarling wolfhound at her side. "That is no housemaid. That is my betrothed wife, Lady Cecilia Marchmont, who has led me a long and costly chase, and whom I have come to take home." The word home, in that cold, pale mouth, was the most frightening thing Cecilia had ever heard, for she knew exactly what home meant with Sir Rowland Ferrys. A great silent house, far from any help, and a locked door, and the fate the servants would not speak of, that had befallen the first wife who had gone there. She felt the whole hard-won safety of the last weeks crumble to nothing in an instant, and the old animal terror rise up in its place, and for one dreadful moment she was again only the hunted girl at the window, cornered, caught, with nowhere left to run. The other maids had shrunk away from her, staring, and Mrs. Sowerby was wringing her hands, and Bet stood a little apart, with a look on her sharp face that was half triumph and half, now that she saw what manner of man she had helped, dawning horror. No one moved to help her. No one ever had. That was the lesson Cecilia had learned in the worst of her life, the lesson that had sent her out of the window alone, that in the end there is no one, that a woman without money or power must save herself because the world will stand, and watch her dragged away and call it the law. And so she gathered herself, even in her terror, to fight the only way she could, with words and with such dignity as she had left. She lifted her chin and opened her mouth to deny him, to refuse, to make them at least hear her refuse before he took her. And it was in that moment, when she had braced to stand alone as she had always stood alone, that she learned she was not, this time, alone at all. For a moment the great hall of Thornbury held its breath, and Cecilia stood exposed before them all. No longer Cissy Marsh the maid, but Lady Cecilia Marchmont the runaway, named at last, with the whole household staring and the cruel triumph rising in Sir Rowland's pale face, and the growl deepening in the throat of the dog at her side. And then, into that frozen moment, came the one voice in the house that could command it. "You will take no one from this house," said the Duke of Thornbury. He had come in quietly, unnoticed, and he stood now at the foot of the great staircase, and he was not the shut-away recluse of the last 5 years, but every inch, suddenly, what he had been born, a duke, cold and towering and terrible, with an authority in his quiet voice that turned every head and stopped Sir Rowland Ferrys where he stood. "This lady," said the Duke, and he crossed the hall to stand beside Cecilia and the bristling dog, so that the three of them faced the hunter together. "Is a guest under my roof and my protection. You will address her with respect, and you will state your business to me, and then you will leave my house." Sir Rowland recovered himself and smiled his cold smile and grew smooth and dangerous. "Your grace is imposed upon. The creature is a runaway, bound to me by settlements her own guardian signed. She is promised to me in marriage and the law. The law does not compel a woman of full age to marry against her will," said the Duke, "whatever her guardian has signed, and whatever you have paid him. It never has. You have chased across 3 counties a lady who fled you, and you have frightened her into hiding in a scullery, and you stand in my hall and call it a betrothal. I call it something else." His voice dropped, and went colder than Sir Rowland's own. "I know your name, Ferris. I knew it before you crossed my threshold. I know what became of your first wife, and so, I begin to think, does half the county, though they have been too afraid of your money to say it aloud. This lady is not going with you. Not today, not ever. And if you imagine you will compel her, by law or by force, you will find that a duke's protection is a very different wall to batter than a frightened orphan girl alone. Now get out of my house before I loose the dog, who I promise you is a better judge of a man's soul than any magistrate in England, and who has already passed his verdict on you." And the great Wolfhound Bran, as though he understood every word, took one stiff-legged step toward Sir Rowland Ferris and bared his long white teeth in a snarl that raised the hair on every neck in the hall. And Sir Rowland Ferris, rich and cruel and cornered, looked from the snarling beast to the implacable Duke, to the assembled household that had plainly turned against him, and found, for the first time in his bullying life, no purchase and no advantage anywhere. And he went white with fury, and then, being at bottom a coward as such men always are, he gathered the shreds of his dignity and turned on his heel and strode from the hall, and his carriage was heard within the quarter-hour grinding away down the long drive, carrying the cold, pale hunter out of Cecilia's life for good. And Cecilia stood trembling in the great hall between the Duke and the dog who had, between them, saved her, and understood that she was free. It took some time for the understanding to reach the rest of her. She had been afraid so long and so hard that her body did not know at once how to stop. She stood shaking in the middle of the hall while the household stared and murmured and slowly grasped what it had witnessed, that the quiet maid Cissy Marsh was a lady born, an earl's daughter, and that their reclusive master had claimed her openly for his protection and faced down a rich and dangerous man to do it. And Bet, the head housemaid, stood white and stricken at the edge of it all, understanding that the nobody she had schemed against was very far indeed above her, and that whatever notice she had hoped to win of the Duke was gone past recovering, undone by her own spite. But Cecilia had no thought to spare for Bet, nor even yet for the Duke. She turned instead blindly to the great dog, sank down on her knees in the middle of the great hall, in her housemaid's grey gown that was a disguise no longer, and put her arms around Bran's rough neck and pressed her wet face into his coat. And the Wolfhound, the terror of the county, stood patient and proud and let her, and leaned his great weight into her, as if to say the thing was done, and she was safe, and he had known it all along. It was the dog she wept on, there before them all, the one soul who had trusted her before he had any reason to, who had chosen her when she was nobody, and guarded her when she was afraid, and set his own body between her and the man who hunted her, whatever came after. And she scarcely dared yet to hope what might come after. Cecilia knew she would love that great grey creature to the end of her days, for he had seen her, first of anyone at Thornbury, and had never once been wrong. The county buzzed for a season with the tale, though never the whole of it, how the reclusive Duke of Thornbury had faced down cruel Sir Rowland Ferris in his own great hall and sent him packing, and taken under his protection a runaway earl's daughter who had been hiding among his servants. And Sir Rowland, whose name the Duke's open contempt had at last given the county courage to speak against, found the old dark rumours about his first wife rising up around him too loud to silence, and withdrew to his estates in a cloud of suspicion, and troubled no more young women. But the heart of the tale the county never knew, and it belonged only to Thornbury, to a lonely man and a lonely woman, and the great grey dog who had known, long before either of them dared to, that they belonged to one another. The Duke came to find her that evening, in the West Court where they had first truly spoken, with the Wolfhound leaning against her as ever. "You are free of him," he said, "and you are free of the disguise, and free of this house, too, if you wish it. I will see you safely to whatever family or friends will receive Lady Cecilia Marchmont, with an escort and every protection, and you need never scrub another floor, nor fear another Ferris as long as you live. You are a gentlewoman, and an earl's daughter, and you have a world you were born to that is a great deal warmer than a duke's cold scullery. You need not stay at Thornbury an hour longer than you choose." He said it steadily, giving her the freedom, though Cecilia saw what it cost him, saw the old shut-away loneliness braced behind his eyes for her to go. "And if I do not choose to go?" said Cecilia softly. She had done this last month, with being disposed of by others. She had run out of a window and across 3 counties to win the right to choose her own life, and she meant to use it. "You are very quick, Your Grace, to give me back to a world I was miserable in, a world of guardians and settlements and cold men who buy and sell women over stacks of paper. I did not run from all that to be handed politely back to it. I ran to find one place where I was seen for myself, and not for my birth, nor my dowry, nor my usefulness to some man's schemes. And I found it in the strangest corner of England, in a cold house guarded by a savage dog, because the dog looked at me and saw not a runaway, nor an heiress, nor a housemaid, but only a wounded soul who needed one creature not to fear her. And then his master looked at me and saw the same. You are the only man alive, Alexander, who has ever seen me plainly and wanted nothing of me but myself. Bran chose me in an afternoon. I am asking whether his master will do the same. Not out of duty, not to protect a poor runaway, but because he does not, any more than I do, wish to be alone in this great house one day longer. And the Duke of Thornbury, who had shut himself away from all the world for 5 long years, looked at the woman his savage heart's companion had chosen, and felt the last of the ice go out of him, and said unsteadily, "I have been telling myself for a month that a woman like you could never be for a man like me. The same lie I could never cure the dog of believing. It seems I am no wiser than my own hound." And he crossed the little court, and took her hands, and the great dog rose and pressed himself joyfully against them both, near knocking them from their feet, so that they were laughing even as they wept. And there, in the last of the light, the 2 loneliest people in the county stopped, at last, being lonely. They were married in the spring, quietly, in the little church at the edge of the Thornbury woods, with the whole household glad and the great Wolfhound sitting gravely in the family pew, as though he had arranged the entire business himself, which, Cecilia always said, in truth he had, and the shut-up house that had been dark and dreaded for 5 years opened all its windows to the light, and there was laughter in it, and warmth, and in time the patter of children whom the vast gentle dog guarded like a grey nursemaid to the end of his long life. And on the first night of their marriage, the Duke of Thornbury, who had lived so long behind locked doors, left the door of their chamber standing open onto the warm, bright gallery. For the dog, he said, gravely, would want to come and go and check on them, and he would not for the world shut Bran out. But Cecilia knew it was not only for the dog, and that a man who has been alone in the dark for years and is alone no longer has small use for shut doors, and she loved him for the open one more than she could ever say. If this story warmed you even half so much as that great grey dog warmed a runaway's cold and frightened heart, then stay a moment longer with me. Tap the like, so more good souls find their way to this quiet corner where the wounded are seen at last, and the true of heart are chosen for themselves. And subscribe, and stay close, for there is another great house and another hidden name waiting for the next time we sit together by the fire. Until then, be kind to the ones the world has taught to expect a blow. You never truly know, my dear, who is only waiting for one soul not to be afraid.